Linkin Park has been one of my favorite bands for about a year now. They've helped me through a lot, and I've analyzed pretty much every single piece of music they've ever made. I've been really looking forward to making this video for a long time, and now that I've made dedicated videos about each individual album, except One More Light, I feel ready to make this. I won't be talking about every song of each album. I'll probably just mention the really good or really bad ones, and I won't be diving deep into any of the songs specifically. If you're looking for more in-depth explanations and insight about specific songs, I'd recommend watching my individual album videos, as I analyze a lot of lyrics and musical elements in those. With that said, let's go ahead and get into my personal ranking of Linkin Park's 7 studio albums. Enjoy. Starting off with number 7, Linkin Park's worst studio album by far, One More Light. This is one of the only placements that will never be subject to change for me. This album is not good, and if it's your favorite, we can't be friends, I'm sorry. But I'll admit, Heavy is good, for sure my favorite track from this album. Talking to Myself and One More Light can also hit on occasion, and Invisible is decent. Other than that though, the rest of the tracks are just very forgettable, and none of them have anything special. I think Battle Symphony is super overrated, it's one of the worst here, and Sorry for Now is my least favorite Linkin Park song by far. I literally can't listen to it. On the screen right now are my ranking and ratings for this album, since I didn't make a video for it in case you're curious. In conclusion, One More Light is a very ugly stain on an otherwise incredible band. It hurts me so much to put 1,000 Suns at number 6. This is a good album, a huge jump from One More Light, but I can't bring myself to rank it above any of the others. I initially hated this album, only 2 or 3 of the songs really caught my attention at all, and I thought it was kinda lame. But over time and more listening, I've actually come to enjoy it a lot. This is Linkin Park's only concept album. It's based around the end of humanity through nuclear warfare, using a recording from Oppenheimer, which is a super cool addition. I really like the top 3 tracks, Wretches and Kings, Waiting for the End, and The Catalyst. Those 3 especially are what give 1,000 Suns a large part of its memorability in my opinion, especially Wretches and Kings. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. The Messenger is one of my least favorite songs the band has made. Going back to a more positive note though, the progression through the album with all the interludes is done near flawlessly, which is even more impressive when you consider that this was Linkin Park's first concept album. I usually don't enjoy a lot of interludes, but each one, for the most part, feels meaningful to the progression and sounds pretty decent. I talked about this with certain songs in my 1,000 Suns video, but I love how the Requiem and Fallout are references to other tracks in the album. It's a very cool album to listen to, and even though from my own numerical rating perspective there's not much special about it, 1,000 Suns as a whole product is very respectable as a Linkin Park record. I always enjoy listening through it, and I would definitely recommend trying it out if you have some spare time and are looking for a softer take on Linkin Park. I struggled a lot with whether to put this album at 5 or 6, but it has a higher peak so I put it higher. Minutes to Midnight was Linkin Park's first album to move largely away from the more heavy nu metal and rap style that initially brought them fame. This record uses a lot more electronic and softer sounds for an overall more somber and relaxed feel than the previous 2 albums. A lot of people really don't like Minutes to Midnight, which, if you're only into the heavy stuff, it's understandable. There are only 2 songs on this album that could be considered traditionally heavy, but man, those 2 pack it in heavily. No More Sorrow and Given Up are arguably Linkin Park's heaviest tracks, and I love them. Bleed It Out is also very memorable, and No Roads Left is just a depressing masterpiece. It's one of my favorite songs ever lyrically. The lows are admittedly pretty low though. In Between is my least favorite Linkin Park song outside of the One More Light album, and it honestly just feels like the band wanted another track last minute to put on the album. Minutes to Midnight is one of Linkin Park's more emotionally and lyrically masterful records, and many of the tracks have very powerful messages and atmospheres, like No Roads Left and Valentine's Day, for example. I really do like Minutes to Midnight as a whole. There's less of the progression compared to 1,000 Suns, but I think the songs on average are better, and they apply to me more so lyrically. It's also a pretty lengthy record, especially the deluxe edition, so it's difficult for me to pack in a lot of information without going super in-depth on a bunch of different things. If you do want to see more detailed analyses of the songs themselves, I recommend checking out my Minutes to Midnight video. I really enjoyed scripting that video in particular because of the emotional aspects of it. Overall, I like this album, and it's a staple of Linkin Park for sure. Coming up next is The Hunting Party. I actually had this placed at number 6 very recently. It wasn't until I was scripting my video for this album that I really began to appreciate some of the more nuanced details that many of the songs have, especially in The Line in the Sand. The Hunting Party, to the surprise of many fans, did a full 180 from the direction the band had been going in their previous 3 records, going from the more electronic pop rock focused Living Things to this, a collection of heavy metal, hip hop, and other elements. A lot of people were on the fence about this album, which I somewhat understand. I think a lot of fans wanted no deviations from rap metal and at the very least metal in general, and were disappointed when tracks like Final Masquerade took most of the credit over heavier pieces like A Line in the Sand, for example. I personally don't see a problem with having some variety, as long as the music is good and cohesive, and I think Final Masquerade and Until It's Gone were actually pretty good. The two tracks that really stand out, though, are Guilty All the Same and A Line in the Sand. None of the others are really close. Rebellion and All for Nothing are good, but not quite as good as the top tracks from the other albums. The top two largely say The Hunting Party. Without them, I would probably still have it at number 6. As for the general style of the record, it's obviously the band's most traditionally metallic. There's still rapping, but it's not near as iconic as it was in the previous albums. All for Nothing does have some of my favorite rapping from all of Linkin Park's discography, though. Another aspect that gets underappreciated is the drums. Rob Borden does arguably the best drum work of his career, with a noticeably heavier and more apparent presence than the previous albums. Along with the heavier drums, something unique about The Hunting Party is the amount of artist features. 4 different tracks have artists featured in them, my favorite being Rakim from Guilty All the Same, which is my favorite song of the album. Chester also takes somewhat of a backseat in some of the songs, especially All for Nothing and Rebellion, which is interesting. It's nice to see Linkin Park try new things with other artists not named Steve Aoki, and I think the features were a nice and clever addition. The last thing that's unique to The Hunting Party, at least throughout Linkin Park's career, is its ending, or endings. This album, in my eyes, or ears, has 2 separate endings, one being Final Masquerade, and the other being A Line in the Sand. It's really cool, and one of my favorite things about the album. I won't go into all that here, but I analyzed it a lot closer in the A Line in the Sand section of my Hunting Party video. So if you're interested in that or any of the specific songs for that matter, please check out that video. Shameless plug. As a whole, The Hunting Party is great. It's very underrated among Linkin Park fans, and it's always a good time when I listen to it. Number 3 is Living Things. For the longest time I didn't like this album because I thought it was too poppy and mainstream, presumably because of tracks like Burn It Down and Castle of Glass. I hated Lies, Greed, Misery initially. I thought it was Linkin Park's worst song and I couldn't stand it, but now it's actually in my top 5 of the album. In fact, that seems to be a common occurrence. There are many songs on this album that I initially didn't like, but eventually came to enjoy. Living Things is obviously Linkin Park's most electronically focused record, other than One More Light, but we don't talk about that. I think the electronic sounds were generally used pretty well in most of the tracks, and it's where Linkin Park fully committed to this more digital style that they've been developing at points in the previous 2 albums. The best uses of this style are present in Lost in the Echo and I'll Be Gone. Speaking of, Lost in the Echo is by far my favorite track from Living Things. It's one of my top 10 favorite songs of all time, and my number 2 from Linkin Park. I went on a whole 4-minute tangent about it in my Living Things video. There are other bright spots too, like I'll Be Gone, In My Remains, and Victimized. The only low point is Until It Breaks, which is one of the band's bottom 5 songs, from before One More Light at least. I also thought A Light That Never Comes was very overrated. I know it's not technically part of the album, but I wanted to mention it just in case. Other than that though, Living Things is a really great album, without a doubt top 30 or so, and I would totally recommend it to anyone. I honestly surprised myself with how much I like this album, since I'm usually into heavier and more metallic music. Even though it's not metal, I'm very glad that Linkin Park used some screaming in this album. Even though there's not a lot of it, it's still more than was in both of the previous 2 albums, combined probably. My video on this album went probably the deepest into the song's lyrics as any of my others, so if you're the type to analyze lyrics, you might enjoy that video. And you're welcome to talk about your own interpretations in the comments of that video and all of my videos for that matter. Again, great album. Next we have Hybrid Theory, Linkin Park's debut album, known for largely pioneering the rap/nu metal genre that inspired a generation of artists to come. This was the first album I listened to by Linkin Park, and I credit many of its songs with helping me to get into the band, including One Step Closer, In the End, and With You. Hybrid Theory is the band's most popular record, which makes sense considering its huge singles like In the End and Crawling. While it is by a decent margin the band's biggest globally, it seems like a large part of the fanbase is split between it and Meteora as the number 1 album. As you can tell by this ranking that Hybrid Theory is my number 2, mostly because it just doesn't have that much replay value. Many of the tracks sound largely similar, and I have a hard time listening to Hybrid Theory as much as, say, Meteora or Living Things even. Additionally, the fact that there are no ballads on the non-deluxe version means there are no breaks from the angrier and more heavy energy. I do generally prefer heavier songs over ballads by themselves, but I think every rock album should have a ballad or two to provide some variation in the energy. The verses of several of the songs are very samey as well, such as With You, Crawling, Runaway, By Myself, and Pushing Me Away. With over a third of the tracks having large parts that sound very similar, it's easy to tell why this album lacks the same replay value that its successors do. I think the worst offender of this lack of replay value is Crawling, which is probably the most overrated song Linkin Park has ever made. It's my least favorite on the album aside from A Cure for the Itch, of course. Runaway also isn't that good, especially after a listen or two. On to the positive side though, Hybrid Theory features 3 of the band's truly elite songs in my opinion: One Step Closer, Paper Cut, and Points of Authority. With You and A Place for My Head are also honorable mentions. Those top 3 tracks that I mentioned are what's keeping this album afloat above Linkin Park's other works like Living Things. It's hard to deny that this album has some of the best classics the band has made. I will admit, though, I've had a very difficult time deciding whether I like this or Living Things more. Living Things is better as a whole cohesive product, but Hybrid Theory has for the most part better individual tracks. These two albums are incredibly close, and in a few weeks or months, who knows, maybe Hybrid Theory will fall to number 3. And of course, I have to mention this album's role in raising Linkin Park into stardom like they deserve. In the End was the track that had the biggest effect, remaining LP's biggest hit song even after nearly 24 years, amassing over 1.7 billion YouTube views and 1.9 billion Spotify streams. With all this fame, In the End, in my opinion, is still pretty overrated, but it's quite a bit better than Crawling. Really quick, I need to give a shout out to My December. It's by no means my favorite, but it has helped me through a lot, and it's surprisingly a very mature piece despite its placement on an otherwise largely more immature record. I do really love this album though. It was my introduction to Linkin Park, and I still enjoy many of its songs. I love it for bringing one of my favorite bands into the mainstream spotlight, and I'll always be grateful for its contributions to my life. Ah yes, the moment that absolutely no one has been waiting for, Meteora. Meteora has been by far my favorite Linkin Park album since the first time I listened to it about a year ago now. There's no contest for my number 1 LP record, it's not even close. This is one of the greatest albums ever made. It's my 3rd favorite all time behind only The Black Parade and 1X. It has the highest lows and the highest highs of all the band's music. Faint is my favorite LP song and favorite song ever that's not made by My Chemical Romance. Everything about it is just perfection, especially the screaming. Lying From You and From the Inside are also in that elite category I mentioned before. Honorable mentions are Breaking the Habit, Don't Stay, and Figure 09, which is one of Linkin Park's most underrated tracks. There are literally no low points throughout the entire record. Even the 2 that didn't make my best of Linkin Park playlist, Nobody's Listening and Session, are still very respectable. The band members' evolution from the previous album could not be clearer, both musically and maturity-wise. While Hybrid Theory often felt juvenile and just angry at the world, Meteora tones those aspects down a lot while still keeping that signature Linkin Park charm that made them famous. Listening to Meteora is a whole experience. It's more than just an album. It has this tangible magic to it that very few albums ever made can create for me. The order of the tracks is also just perfect, something that cannot be said for Hybrid Theory, where most of the best songs were concentrated at the beginning of the album. The best tracks on this album, though, are spaced out pretty evenly, with only a slight emphasis on the second half, which I honestly prefer to first half heavy records. Even Session, my least favorite track on Meteora, is better than or equal to basically the entirety of One More Light and like a third of the band's other music. Another area which Meteora improved upon Hybrid Theory is its much wider variety of energy and emotions. Hybrid Theory was mostly angry or confused, and Meteora is much more laid back, but not too laid back, and has some energy pacers like Easier to Run and Breaking the Habit. The use of these emotional relief songs are what make Meteora infinitely more cohesive than Hybrid Theory. Easier to Run in particular provides a welcome calming after 4 heavier, more hard rock and rap style pieces, especially the Hybrid Theory-esque Hit the Floor. I oftentimes don't even realize when I'm getting near the end of the album when I listen to it. The ordering and frequent emotion or style changes, even within the songs themselves at times, take away the typical boredom that causes the listener to think about their position in the track order. There's at least one track from this album you could go to for virtually any emotion. Angry, Hit the Floor, Figure 09, Faint. Sad, Easier to Run, Breaking the Habit, From the Inside, Numb. Dignified, Don't Stay, Lying From You. The list goes on. Almost everything you could ever possibly want is here. I also want to use some time to mention the 6 new tracks from Meteora era that were released with Meteora's 20th Anniversary Edition album. I wasn't too big a fan of Healing Foot, and Massive, except for the bridge, but the other 4 were all good. A6 is a great instrumental-focused guitar and rap track that thrives from its relative lack of polishing because of its demo status. Lost is also a very good addition to Linkin Park's discography, acting as an equally great alternative to Numb. The bridge of Lost is one of my favorite Linkin Park bridges. Fighting Myself is just great. Some of Mike's best lines and guitar and drum work is especially satisfying. I gotta take an extra minute to talk about More the Victim, though. It's my favorite from Meteora 20 for so many reasons. Most importantly, the theme. Someone who plays victim no matter who is in the right and trying to bring others down to get out of consequences. This message hits super close to home for me. It's one of Linkin Park's most well-executed tracks lyrically for sure, especially at this point in their career. The chorus is my personal favorite for the reasons I just mentioned, and the Chester pre-chorus always sends chills down my spine. The instrumentals are also great. I love the use of strings and electronic sounds throughout the track, especially the intro, and the guitar and drums are just great for the entire time. Without a doubt, one of Linkin Park's best songs. It will make an appearance on my next video. Tune in. The sheer mastery that Linkin Park displayed in this album is unrivaled in all of their other work. It's a top 3 album of all time, and I never get tired of it, even after severely overplaying it for the better part of a year at this point. If there's one thing I want you to learn from all my videos up to this point, it's go listen to Meteora and Meteora 20 as soon as you possibly can if you haven't already. It will change your life. There you have it, my ranking of all 7 Linkin Park studio albums. I didn't include Reanimation because I don't think it's as good as Hybrid Theory, and I really didn't want to spend more time on Hybrid Theory than I had to. Like I said, Hybrid Theory and Living Things are in a constant battle for the number 2 spot, and 1,000 Suns and Minutes to Midnight are very close as well. I think The Hunting Party is the band's most underrated album. I know a lot of the fans didn't like it, and it's Linkin Park's worst performing studio album commercially, which is wild to me. Guilty All the Same is top 3. I love this band more than I love most things in the world. It's without a doubt in my top 3 bands. I have Linkin Park and Starset duking it out for the number 2 and 3 spots, but I honestly don't care about ranking bands, as I'll probably flip-flop between many of them forever. My Chemical Romance is still definitely my favorite, but Linkin Park and Starset give them a serious run for their money. I've also been pretty obsessed with Black Veil Brides over the past few months, so expect some videos on them too in the future. Speaking of future videos, I will soon be coming out with probably my final installment of the Linkin Park series on this channel. I know it's sad. It'll be my top 20 Linkin Park songs, which I've been really excited to do for a while now. It's always really interesting seeing other people's top 20 or 20 songs of a band I like, and I'm hoping that that video will be interesting for some of you. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I'm not even sure if anyone watches my videos all the way through, but if you're still here, please leave a comment below to let me know. Additionally, if you would like to, please drop your own ranking of the Linkin Park albums in the comments. I always love seeing your opinions and talking about them with you. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day, guys.